Welcome to the TMRN Radio Network. Today is Saturday, August 10th, and the producer of today's show is Fox. We're going to be discussing a number of topics with Courtney Brown, who is a longtime researcher in the field of remote viewing and also has a degree in political science and works in an academic setting. He's the director and founder of the Farsight organization. For more information, please visit his website, www.farsight.org. Hello, Courtney. Welcome to our show.
Blaine, it's my great pleasure to be here, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you. We prefer to have an open discussion here and just let the conversation flow as it will. So we're going to assume that everyone is familiar with your work, especially the Climate Change Project, and then also to a little bit the Atlantis project that is your new project that's out there. And so joining us will be some roundtable participants, Mash, Disaster Cat, and Neil. Mash?
Yes.
Thanks for coming. Disaster Cat?
Hi.
And Neil?
Hi, folks. Pleasure to be here. Nice to meet you again, Courtney.
Great.
So thanks for everybody. So now, Courtney, let's get into the climate study. The dates have come and passed, and what are some of your thoughts?
Well, as you know, I'm the director of the Farsight Institute, and just for spelling, the website is www.farsight, like seeing far, FARSIGHT.org, O-R-G, because we're a nonprofit. And we're really the only science shop venue anywhere where you can see these full-blown science projects using remote viewing procedures that were developed by the United States military and used for espionage purposes, or procedures that are derivative of those methodologies. So in terms of full-blown science projects, public participation in the data collection, being able to see all the results, all the remote viewing sessions, presentations that tie it all together, there is no other place. So this set of projects we do is extremely valuable in my perspective as a planetary resource. However, the most recent projects have really been cliffhangers. And while we've always had important projects, we're sort of noted for that, these last couple have been really interesting from a sort of an OMG moment. So starting with the climate project, back in 2008, we wanted to test the remote viewing process to see if it could detect small levels of climate change. And so we set up an experiment, I designed it, where we would look for, we'd have a complete randomization process for the targets, and those are the things that the remote viewers using these military or military-derived procedures are supposed to focus on and describe. And we had two dates, June 1st, 2008 and June 1st, 2013. And the idea was that we were supposed to see if we could detect what we thought would be small levels of climate change between that 5-year period. And we picked a 5-year period because we didn't want to wait too long. So 5 years was considered long enough. And many of the sessions were for 2008 and many of the sessions were for 2013. Now, when the results came in, the results for 2008 were perfect. And the remote viewers, of course, always do their work totally blind. We had a beyond double-blind experimental design, so there's no way the remote viewers could have known what targets they were remote viewing when they were doing it. So the sessions for 2008 targets were perfect. The tourists were still going to the beach, everything was nice, fine, so on. But a huge number of the targets for 2013, June 1st, were bonkers. They were just wacky. It was like crazy stuff. It was like two major things came out. And that was the weather itself had gone nuts. It was dramatically different worldwide than it was in 2008. And from a meteorological perspective, that's impossible. Because in 2008, trying to predict what it will be like 5 years in the future, that's like simple. You just predicted it'll be the same. I mean, if you were in 1965 and you're trying to predict what the weather will be like in 1970, you'd say it's going to be the same. 5 years is hardly anything. So, but these results came in that the weather had dramatically changed. And then we had something that looked like meteor impacts. So we had those two things causing the meteor impacts, causing large displacement waves or tsunamis affecting coastal regions. Now, this project was back-to-back with a long-term investigation that we've been working on and a long-term topic that we've been having focuses on with regard to what we call multiple realities or parallel universes or multiple timelines or other worlds. And we had a year-long project called the Multiple Universe Project that ended up being published, the experiment and all the data ended up being published in a leading peer-reviewed scientific journal. And you can see that yourself if you go to our homepage, www.farsight.org, and around near the bottom of the nav bar to the right of it, you'll see a brown banner saying latest peer-reviewed published research. Click on that and you get the whole article. So you get an idea of how we've really investigated this multiple reality issue. This is an idea that was originally raised in 1957 by Hugh Everett, a physicist who studied at Princeton University under John Wheeler. And it was called the Other Worlds Interpretation of Quantum Mechanics. And it was developed to explain a long, perplexing quantum mechanical experiment called the two-slit experiment. The issue is that it went, this new interpretation, no one's quabbled with the mathematics. I'm an applied mathematician. I work within a social science program. So the mathematics of it are beautiful. There's no problem with that. The issue is the interpretation. And the interpretation was fundamentally different from the then dominant view of quantum mechanics, which was the Copenhagen interpretation. And the Copenhagen interpretation, pioneered and strongly supported by Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg, was that there is a probabilistic ether from which material things pop out when they're registered or observed in some way. So things don't really exist except in some type of probability cloud until you look at them. And then, boom, there they are. You have a photon, you have an electron, you have an atom, and so on. So for Hugh Everett, who was the one who came up with the Other Worlds interpretation, this was a monstrosity. You needed an external event to trigger reality into being, the external event being to look at something. And it ignored the idea that these waves that things were coming out from would exist for, potentially for other things. And so he came up with this alternate interpretation. He was widely laughed at the time. And he left physics as a result of that and went into the Defense Department and was a fundamental person in the development of our nuclear policies during that time period, 60s and 70s. And then what happened was, now things have changed. While he was the only person supporting his ideas back in 1957, currently 18% of physicists now accept the Other Worlds interpretation, the Hugh Everett interpretation of physical reality as being the correct one. Now that still means 82% go along with either the Standard Model or the Copenhagen interpretation. But the Copenhagen interpretation, while more people still support it, it's shrinking, meaning it started out with one person, Hugh Everett, and now it's up to 18%. And what we're really waiting for is for the older physicists who hang on to the Standard Model or the Copenhagen interpretation to retire and die off and be replaced by the younger generation of physicists who have been open to these ideas from the very beginning. Because the Copenhagen interpretation simply does not match the facts, meaning the reality, the physical experiments simply don't match what the Copenhagen interpretation says. And the Other Worlds interpretation, Hugh Everett's interpretation, does match the physical observations. So you can get into endless arguments with physicists about this, but the trend seems to be clear that the Copenhagen interpretation and the Standard Model are going to be dustbin material eventually, and the Other Worlds interpretation looks like it will be the correct one. And the basic idea is that it is generalizable to the macro level. It's not just the micro level, the quantum mechanical world. It's generalizable to you and us, you and us. I mean, we are we are all part of that thing. So basically what we have is we can be treated like the quantum mechanical stuff. That means that there is no probabilistic ether from which we emerge, that there are multiple infinite variety of all of us, just like there's an infinite variety of the subatomic particles, and all of those things exist in real life. Now, mainstream physicists adopting the Copenhagen interpretation said, this is crazy. There's only one reality. I'm looking at it. There's only one me. There's only one car I have. There's only one house I have. I only have one wife, things like that. So that was really sort of a visual interpretation of reality that they were trying to make stick. But the reality is that physicists have never, and this is an absolute fact, physicists have never, ever found anything solid. Their bodies or cars or computers, they're just made of molecules with empty space in between, and the molecules are made up of atoms with empty space, and the atoms are made up of subatomic particles, and if you break those down and break those down and break those down, they have never ever found a solid billiard ball type of anything. Never in the history of science. It doesn't exist. The only thing they find are waves. Energy, waves interacting with frequencies, and the waves interact using principles of constructive and destructive interference to produce distortions of time-space that they call wave packets. But the basic idea is that we are not made of solid stuff. We are just frequencies. Now imagine a radio. You hear things coming out of the radio, but you know it's just frequencies, electronic and then sound frequencies, but just frequencies. And you're not hearing other stations on the radio because you're tuned into only one. So the other ones, for the all intents and purposes, don't exist. Think of a TV, same thing. You see a picture, but there are other stations broadcasting on different frequencies, but you don't see them. If you put a primitive person in front of a TV, they'll think that there's somebody in the TV and they'll try to break into it. Well, let's add 10 years from now, or maybe 15 years from now. We're clearly moving in that direction, where you'll have realistic three-dimensional television. I mean, they're already experimenting with stuff. If you take a person of today and time warp them into the future, into somebody's living room 15 years from now, they'll see Han Solo and Princess Leia and Luke Skywalker walking around in the living room, and they'll say, my gosh, what are they doing here? And you'll say, no, that's just the TV. Those are just pictures. It's just frequencies interacting. But the person will look and say, they don't look like frequencies to me. That looks like Han Solo and Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia. So the idea is we, all of us, Plane, you, Disaster Cat, everybody, we're all just frequencies interacting. And when you think of it in terms of frequencies, you then say, well, there's got to be a receiver. That's what our brains are. Our brains are very complex, highly evolved hologram generators, meaning they select out the frequencies they want you to see, and our brains screen out everything else. That's why you don't see the past. That's why you don't see the future. That's why you see only the now. And from an evolutionary perspective, that's useful. You don't need to see the gazelle of yesterday, and you don't need to see the elephant of tomorrow. You need to see the lion of today. So, because you have to survive that lion. So,
But Courtney,
go ahead.
This is essentially from a physics point of view.
Yes, but to understand the climate project, you have to understand this. Now, let's jump right into the climate project. Is that what you want me to do?
Yeah, basically, I think many of our listeners today will have heard you explain the physics approach or this background before. And so we kind of would like to delve into some
But the idea of the climate project, however, was based on the understanding that there are multiple timelines and that it is impossible to predict a single future because at every point of the now, multiple futures branch out. That means there is no one single future, so you can't predict a single future. There's only a multiplicity for every point of the now. It's very hard to wrap your head around that, but all the experimental evidence indicates that that is in fact the case. So when we were looking at the climate project, 5 years of change between 2008 and 2013, we said, and I said explicitly, these are not our timelines. I can't predict our timelines. But we're hoping there will be a correlation between what we do see in these other times and us, because if the events are big enough, they should affect many timelines, and we should see some correlation. So the big two things that we saw in the climate project were radically different weather and meteor events. Those two things. So that's what we were looking for.
I thought you saw a lot of tsunamis. I mean,
The
East
tsunamis,
Africa
actually, it was more, they were displacement waves. Tsunamis are short little things that are a few feet tall, and they cause a lot of damage, but they're, not that tall. Displacement waves are from impacts, and they can be really big. So you can call them tsunamis, but the better term is displacement waves, big waves due to impacts. Now you're misunderstanding. What were the displacement waves caused by? They were caused by meteor impacts. So what we were looking for is weather that's radically different in a negative sense and huge meteor events. But we stated in the very beginning, these are not our timelines, but we're looking for some correlation. Something will be similar between what these two timelines are, and we looked at two separate future timelines to see if we could find it. We found meteor events and we found wacky weather in both of them. So let's go to the weather, and then let's go to the meteor stuff, because that'll hit your displacement wave stuff. The weather, from a meteorological perspective, is as wacky as you can imagine. We've had, in fact, Daz Smith, one of the remote viewers in this project, and for many of our far-side projects, started a new website called www.climatechange2013.com. And if you click on the news banner for that, you get a page after page after page of a chronology of the wackiest weather we've ever had. I believe, Disaster Cat, you're in Britain, right? They had snow. You're in Ireland, right?
Yeah, I'm in Ireland. I'm in the Irish Republic. And
go ahead. You had snow in May, as far as I understand. Is that correct? I mean, like a lot of it.
I don't think we had snow right here. We didn't get that much snow this winter, but we did a couple of years ago. We had severe winters, like they'd only seen like once or twice since the 1940s.
Yeah,
and we had a couple of those almost in a row in between. But what we did have, England had a lot of snow. We had a lot of cold rain and wet. We had, like, I think the coldest March in decades.
Well, I was talking about May, though. And
May.
Yeah, there was a lot of snow in parts of Britain in May, and that was really extreme. But in China, they'd had the worst flooding in history. They had to evacuate Calgary and much of Alberta. There's been historic floods all throughout Europe and Germany and so on. In Holland, and the floods in India are historic. They have entire cities washed down, like some disaster movie made with CGI effects in Hollywood, washed down rivers in India. We've had, of course, the big, the big tornado in Oklahoma, Hurricane Sandy. It goes on, and you can think of all of these as idiosyncratic, but when you look at them as a group, they're extraordinary. In Australia,
I was going to say, in March and May, we got so much rain that the potato crops were pretty much destroyed, which if this had been, 300 years ago, everybody would have died.
In the east coast of the United States, for example, we've had so much rain over the last 3 months that the summer basically went away. It's been a really wacky thing. I haven't seen the sun for a whole day the entire summer. I had to cancel my vacation because of rain. Things are just weird. So the weather is just legitimately crazy. And so the other thing is, let's go now to, meaning it's radically different from what it was in 2008. And from a meteorological perspective, that was not predictable. So what about the meteor stuff? Well, in February 15, 2008, there were two extraordinary, much more rare than once-in-a-lifetime meteor events. You had the approach of DA-14, which was a large asteroid that passed within the orbits of our own satellites. It came very close to the atmosphere. It was a near miss, and even it was a near miss, and even mainstream people were saying we've got to be really on the lookout. This could be a disaster. Moreover, it came from the southern hemisphere, which would have, if it had hit, would have exactly matched the climate project stuff. Secondly, we had the large meteor that came over Russia, that impacted Russia on February 15th. Now, both of those things happened within the same 24-hour period. CNN said that the chance of that happening, according to mainstream science, within the same 24-hour period, those are two hits, more rare than lifetime events, was 1 out of 100 million. And so that Russian meteorite had one other wrinkle. We have video cameras all over the place. So it's very interesting when that one came in, there were a lot of video coverage of it. And some of the video coverage is extraordinary. One in particular, many of you might have seen, clearly shows that something, when it was streaking overhead, something came from behind the meteor and impacted the meteor, fragmenting it, breaking it up and throwing pieces of it far into front. Now there's only 3 things that could have done that. Another meteor could have hit it. The probability of that happening is so small, I personally disregard it, but it's possible. The second thing could have been it could have been part of an anti-ballistic missile system. Now, in fact, the next day, a Russian general did announce that, in fact, it was part of an anti-ballistic missile system. That was a story that was immediately pulled, however, and for good reasons. That wouldn't bring up the issue of weaponization of space. All types of things would be raised. Anyway, so we don't know if that's true, but it is interesting that a Russian general did mention that. And then the only other thing it could be would be if it would be an extraterrestrial intervention. And the worst kept secret probably on the planet is that the worst kept secret on the planet is that that there is some form of contact, communication, interaction with some extraterrestrial species and the US government, and possibly also the Russian government and some other governments. And I know for a fact that if the military saw these climate project results, and I know for a fact that they do watch our results, our projects very carefully. I mean, the military people are on our board of governors, for heaven's sake. So, they do watch what we do very carefully, and they consider it with great respect. And so when we did this, it's for certain that, in my mind, they would have turned to whatever sources they had, including extraterrestrial, and said, hey, look, if this thing is going to happen, fix it. Now, that could possibly explain something happened to the Russian meteor. I mean, something clearly hit it. The question is, if something was willing to intervene, such as an anti-ballistic missile system or extraterrestrial, especially anti-ballistic missile system, they would have had to have been ready for it. Meaning, our technology is okay, but it's not that good. Meaning, they would have had to have had their guns locked and loaded. They would have had to have been ready. And so that brings up the idea that the climate project may have been used to, say, put them on high alert to do something like that. Secondly, if it was an extraterrestrial intervention, technologically that would have been easier to do, then the climate project would have been used potentially to go to the extraterrestrials and say, look, we're working with you. If you want this relationship to continue, deal with that. Now, if that's what happened, I can't think of anything else that possibly could have done the impacting of the Russian meteor. But if that happened, that leaves open the possibility that intervention was done with respect to DA-14. I mean, I know the military people. If they saw something like that as a possibility, they would have immediately turned to the extraterrestrial contacts and said, if you want our relationship to continue, deal with that. And the extraterrestrials, if they nudged it far enough out, they could have just about spit on it. You needed very little nudging in order to make it deviate just slightly in order so it would miss the planet. So the point is, we had 2 much more rare than once in a lifetime meteor events. Now the details were different. So Plain, you said, where were the tsunamis? The tsunamis only happen if the things hit the ground. The point is, we were expecting very rare, extraordinary meteor events that were unpredictable in 2008. And that's exactly what we got. In fact, the meteor events that we did get were so rare that on February 16th, which was the day after they happened, I came out with a video, a YouTube video, a written announcement, and sent out to all of our newsletter recipients saying, those data, these meteor events met the criteria of our climate project. And so on February 16th, I said, we're calling an end to that part of the data, meaning since it's so rare, we should expect no further meteor events through June 1st, 2013, that this was it. And so if you didn't hear that, if you didn't know that we did that, then you're guilty of not having our free newsletter, because there's no reason not to have it. We are a nonprofit. We do not take out any advertising space. If we do something and there's a project you want to follow, if you don't get our newsletter, you don't get it. So to get it, the newsletter that we have, just go to our homepage or any page on Farsight website, farsight.org, go to the bottom of the nav bar and you'll see a big blue banner there. It says subscribe to our free newsletter. Put your name and email address in there and you're done, and you'll get the updates. We never give out the email addresses for any reason whatsoever, and we only send out something like once every couple months when we have something new that's come up. So that's really important. So Plain, your question, like where were the tsunamis, was based on the understanding that you were looking for the tsunamis. What we were looking for was the meteor stuff. And given the evidence that there may have been some intervention, especially with the video. Plain, did you see the video of the thing hitting the Russian meteor?
Yes, I did. I mean, I think that area, Chelyabinsk, is the key Russian area for nuclear weapons development. And so I would expect that to have an anti-ballistic missile system more or less ready to go.
That's a very real possibility. That's a very real possibility.
Basically, many of us think that U.S.-Russian relations are actually worse today than during most of the Cold War. Now, that's debatable, I suppose, but clearly you can see that there are serious geopolitical struggles going on between the U.S. and Russia at the moment. And so if they're going to protect an area other than a big city like Moscow, that is the area that they would be protecting, I would expect. So
yeah.
that it seems to me also, I'm a little bit more of a believer in the idea that there are deep black programs that are much more advanced than what we get to see.
Oh, that's for sure. You know, what
so
the reality is.
I mean, we've been working and they've been working on stuff. I mean, some of it, you know, some of the research from advanced people like Tesla from a long time ago. So I really wouldn't be surprised if hidden away they had the ability to do that. But nonetheless, it was an incredible thing to watch. The performance was practically at an extraterrestrial level.
Yeah. But now, Plain, if you don't mind, can I be even more of a devil's advocate than you are? Can I be even more mean and nasty to myself? Let us say you have a listener out there who's saying the following. Hey, Courtney, this is junk. This multiple universe thing that the meteors impacted and caused the displacement waves and ruined, you know, Sydney and things like that. That multiple universe stuff, that's just like a cop-out. And what you're really trying to do is to avoid saying the project failed and remote viewing doesn't work. So, like, this is just ridiculous. So, do you mind if I ask myself that question?
Go for it.
Okay. Well, you see, that question has a number of problems. First of all, it ignores completely the fact that there is no accuracy problem with details for targets that are remote viewed using these military methodologies in the past. Meaning, if you're looking at the Titanic sinking, if under totally blind conditions, if the tasker has the experiment set up that the person is supposed to be remote viewing the Titanic, you get the sinking of the Titanic. You don't get the timeline where the Titanic didn't sink, but it actually docked in New York. You get the Titanic sinking. Well, the reason is that when the tasker, the person who designs the target, is designing that target, she or he knows which timeline they want. They want the one where the Titanic sunk. That was on their timeline. But when you're going into the future, you don't know. You don't know what's coming, so you don't know a way to pick the timeline. Our multiple universe project, which was repeated for an entire year, every month, demonstrated that only under certain conditions can you accurately get the details of any future description. And that's only in a situation where the person picking the target is in the future after the event, but so the recessions are done first before there is a target, and then you wait a period of time for something crazy in the world to happen, anything. And then the tasker at some future point in time picks the target. Mind you, the sessions were already done months before. So he's picking a target for sessions that he hasn't seen, but have already been completed. That actually works perfect. So we had a theory, a prediction, and a result. And it was perfect, which is why it got published in the leading peer-reviewed journal. So in our current
Courtney,
situation...
can I add another devil's advocate question then?
Yeah.
Or issue? Part of the way you structured it was essentially if in the future scientists recognize the reality of remote viewing.
Yes.
And I am a little skeptical of that, as my subconscious is not as happy with something that nebulous. So first of all, I guess what I would ask is, looking back on this project, is there any way you wish you had done it differently?
No, because this project was done as a first of its kind. So what we had done was we said, if scientists do publicly acknowledge the reality of remote viewing and extraterrestrial life, we had both of those thrown in there.
Yes, I know.
We said, well, the people might behave differently towards the planet, meaning there might be a cascade of events that would occur, and it might be reflected in some climate change. That was the hope. And
okay, but Courtney, what if the question had been, or the choices had been something like, what if people, start to recognize that they should love each other more, or that they should pay more attention to their health?
That's not a discrete event that you could actually witness in news stories. We needed something that was discrete, that you could witness in news stories. Now, I'm not defending the two. See, we tried to define two separate timelines, one where one thing happened and another where it didn't happen, and see if there was a difference between those two timelines. Now, I'm not defending the actual choice of what those criteria were. Those criteria were of interest to me, so I sort of put them in. But you're very fair to say, why didn't you pick something else? But the love each other would not have worked. It has to be something physical that you could say, that you could clearly see in a newsletter, in a news report. Something where one timeline where something happens, X, Y, Z, and another timeline where those things didn't happen.
Courtney, I have a question related to that. Why didn't you just look at the world in try to specify our timeline and look at the places in 2008 and then look at them again in 2013?
You can't do it. You can get 2008, but because we were at 2008, but you can't get the future. You can't get the future like that. If you look at the future, like 5 years into the future, according to the theory, at every moment of the now, there's a multiplicity of futures, an infinite variety, and it is impossible. It's not that it's difficult. It's impossible to predict a single future, because a single future does not exist. There's only multiple futures that are, as different as you can imagine. Some are very similar, some are extremely different. But there is no single future, so you can't predict it. Now, there is no single past either, but it's easy to pick a single past because you know the timeline that you want. But in the future, you don't know the timeline, so you can get basically anything. That's why.
Why can't you target? If you can target other things, if you can target in the past, why can't you target the timeline, say that you personally, I'm going to be in 2013?
Because I will be in all of those futures. There is no single future. That's what you need to wrap your head around. There is none. Now, that scientific article that I showed you on multiple universes, that was the peer-reviewed journal, that you can get the article on our homepage, that explains it all. I mean, it's all there. This was a specific test. That was a specific test to see if it was possible to pick out a single timeline from a multiplicity of timelines that are in the future if the tasker is located in the future. In a case of multiple universes, it should be possible. And
Well,
because that's, and it worked perfectly. So we had a theory, a prediction, and a result. So
Courtney?
the reason disaster it can't work is because it can't work. There is no single future. Go ahead, Plain.
Okay, Courtney and Disaster Cat. Courtney, in the remote viewing world, there are a lot of opinions, of course. Different people have different opinions. But one of the more common ones is that when you're dealing with the future, some things are, as a practical matter, fixed and some things aren't. And you may disagree with that. I don't know for sure. But so that if you're looking at a big event, let's say a year before 9/11, you were looking for, a major event, you would have found 9/11. But the particulars of it might have varied a little bit, or the fates of certain people, or so on and so forth. That theory is pretty widespread. So this is kind of answering Disaster Cat's question about how can you look at things. I don't know about the targeting a timeline idea, but I'm just saying that if you can get a big enough event, it seems more solid, so to speak, when you're dealing with.
Well, you're actually raising a very good point, and you're actually correct. But the reason this is beginning to be out there in the remote viewing field is because of the work we've been doing at Farsight. That's exactly the result we've been pushing. The idea is that if you have a multiplicity of futures, small events like what color shirt you're wearing will not have an effect on other timelines. And so it'll be impossible to predict details like that. But major events will have sort of, they'll have some impact on a huge swath of timelines. So you should be able to see evidence of them. The details will always be different, but you should see evidence of it. For example, if there's a remote viewing session, and we did this experiment of an earthquake, and it's what looks like from the remote viewing sessions, a devastating earthquake. It's impossible to predict that that location will have a devastating earthquake. The only thing that you can say, according to the theory, is that some version of that location will have that exact devastating earthquake. And if it's big enough, you should see evidence of it in other timelines. So you wait however much you're supposed to wait, and sure enough, there is an earthquake on that time. But it's likely to be a much lower magnitude just because of probability reasons. That doesn't mean that the larger earthquake doesn't happen to you in another timeline. This idea of having other timelines is not a cop-out. It's part of our fundamental research. So if somebody doesn't like the idea, well, you can't take the rest of our research and say, I'll accept only this, but it's based on the multiple timeline issue, so I'm not going to take that part. Because the whole thing is based on all of that. For example, you can't see the past when we started this program, but it can be remote viewed. It's still there, but you can't see it. It's still there because it happens simultaneously, essentially, with all things in the future, present, and past. But you can't see it because it no longer has an exact frequency sync with your current now. Anything that goes out of the frequency sync is like something like a station that drifts off the dial from where your dial is set on the radio. You're no longer listening to it. That's how we get forward movement in time. The perceptions move in a change of frequency. That means you don't see the past anymore, but they're still there. And when you remote view something in the past, you're not going to a library and looking it up in a Dewey Decimal System. You're actually witnessing the past live, right then and there. You're tuning it in. The reason remote viewing works is remote viewers have spent time, effort, training to learn how to let some things come through the brain, some frequencies that the brain normally would screen out. That's why it works. And it's just like going to the Olympics. If you go to the Olympics, you can see people jump higher, you can see people run faster than you can see people do gymnastics better than you can, because they've trained to be able to get their bodies and minds to coordinate to do things that you can't do. That's what remote viewers do. They have a brain that's normally screening out everything, and they work years to be able to get that brain to loosen up, to let some things in that they want to see. It takes a lot of work and training to be really good at it. Someone can have, primitive remote viewing experiences after a very short course in remote viewing, but to get good enough so that you can do it regularly all the time and and get great graphics out of it and convince the world that these things are real, that's a totally different thing. And that's why these people work at this thing.
So can you tell me really briefly, what would be the difference between somebody doing remote viewing and myself, the natural psychic, having a dream or a vision that later came true?
It's the way it's done. It's the structure of it. I can go up, for example, you have some people in music who are natural intuitives with music, and they have very little formal training, but they can produce beautiful things. But, most people can't do beautiful things without training, but they can still make noise with an instrument. You can go up to a piano and bang on it, and if you fiddle with it long enough, you've got chopsticks coming out, and if you fiddle with it long enough, you may have some nice sounds coming out of the piano that are very interesting. But if you want to play in Carnegie Hall with structured music and play Beethoven, there's training that's involved in that. And so a natural psychic can have very real experiences, but to get the level of accuracy up so that they're hitting it almost every single time, and they're getting really high levels of detail with great sketches, that's not something natural psychics normally do. The training really does help. By the way, we have fewer than 10 people who are that good on the whole planet. After teaching literally thousands for the last 18 years, there's no money in this field. So even if you do art or a musical instrument, most people that really become serious with their musical instrument hope that at some point they can do something with it. Or same thing with art, that they'll be able to sell their art in some way. So they go to art school or they go to music school. With remote viewing, we're not there yet. And so the only people who dedicate 10 years of their life to get really good at this thing are people who are personally really motivated to do it as a spare hobby in their spare time. And there's in a concentrated effort, year after year, day after day, week after week, year after year for a decade. That takes real commitment, but there's no real money in it. So
well, Courtney, hold on. Let me. Well, I'm one of those hobbyists, I guess you would say. Let me bring in another hobbyist. Mash, okay. Do you have any questions for Courtney here?
Yeah, actually, I do have one question. Okay, so back to the observation of reality thing.
Yeah.
Would you consider thinking an observation of reality?
Absolutely. In fact, according to the theory, anything that you think about manifests in some way. And it doesn't mean that you're going to see it, but that's how dreams work. Now, if you think of Freud's understanding of dreams, he basically thought of that as a physiological element of the physical brain. So it's a consequence of the computational process in the brain, and that you have to interpret these things and so on. The evidence is more like that when you are sleeping, you're actually disconnecting from the physical apparatus and living the life you lived before you were born and the same life you'll live after you're dead. And that thought sort of instantly materializes rather than with the delay that we have in our physical world. And so if you think about something in your dreams, snap, you're there. Also, when you talk to somebody in your dreams, nobody ever has a dream in which they're physically moving their mouth and air is coming out and they're communicating like you and I are communicating now with molecules vibrating. Dream communication is always thought communication, telepathic communication. You just start looking at your dreams very carefully. See if you ever find a dream where you're actually pushing air out of your lungs in order to talk. So that's how people communicate outside of a body. So the big realization with regard to the Freud stuff is that we don't have a soul. We are the soul, and we have a body. So that's the big difference. Freud looked at things from a totally different perspective. And so when you are thinking of who we are, physically who we are, you're going to have, the remote viewing has tremendous implications for all of the intellectual paradigm structures that we have set up previously, including Freud, with respect to our thought process. So yes, the thought process actually creates. The thought process creates instantly in the dream state, which is you outside of the physical body. But in this particular physical realm, there's a time delay. So typically you create also when you're thinking here, but in order for something to manifest physically, according to the theory, you have to think about it a lot, and there's a time delay.
Well, okay, but if you're, let's say you're remote viewing a future event, or what you, perception, multiple universe, whatever, are you remote viewing a physical reality, or
as physical as anything else?
the thought of a physical?
No, there's no difference. Meaning, if you have these alternate realities, all of them are equal to the one that you're experiencing right now. And they're absolutely as real as the one you're experiencing right now. You're not seeing them because this brain screens them out. With training, with remote viewing, you can end up perceiving them. And I am absolutely certain that in the not too distant future, perhaps within 20 years, we will have technology that will be able to tune in to these alternate realities, and you'll see them on a computer screen. This is one of the most important elements of remote viewing research. You know, I should add that we also found out some other things from our research, including the climate project, and that is that when remote viewers remote view the future, many of them have a tendency to drift towards the most dramatic versions of future events. So if there's an earthquake in the future, many of the remote viewers will drift towards the most dramatic version of it. So it's like a horrific earthquake. And this is very useful because now going forward, when we can do experiments, we know two things. When we remote view the future, the remote viewers, many of them, not all, will tend to pick up the most dramatic versions of events. And we also know that those most dramatic versions of events on a probabilistic basis will not manifest in our timeline as dramatic, but there should be some evidence of that. So let's look at the climate project. If we were to repeat it over time, what do we now know? We know that whenever we remote view the future, say 5 or 10 years out, we will get the details wrong, but we will get the essence, the big things correct. So let us go to 2008, and let us say that we knew this in 2008, and we got the results. What could we then say? We could then say, there's only two things that we know with a high level of probability will happen. The weather will be nothing like what it is in 2008, and B, there's going to be something related to meteors happening before June 1st, 2013. That's all we would be able to say. But that is hugely important. It's really important to know that. And even if there is, especially if there was intervention with the two things, DA-14 and the Russian meteor, that shows you why it's important, because it gives you an alert. If you don't do anything about it, the things will hit you. But with an alert, you have some abilities to do something about it. Now, if it was an earthquake, there's really not much you can do. If it's a solar coronal mass ejection, there's not much you can do. But some things you can do something about. So that's very useful. So the knowledge that the remote viewers may pick up the worst case scenario of total events is really useful, because that is absolutely unambiguous, the type of thing that's heading in your direction. And then you can either do something about it so that your reality is not affected by it, or you can bet that you'll be sort of on the probability curve a little bit away from the most disastrous side of it, and hope that it's not going to be as bad. But knowing that in the future, in terms of the general essence, is really important.
Would you say that remote viewers will most likely see the most probable?
No, they will not see the most probable. They will see the future, and many of them, perhaps more than 50%, tend to drift to the most, if there's something dramatic going on, they will tend to drift to the most dramatic version of that. But like from a
temporal attractor.
Yeah, like if they see a major earthquake, they'll be attracted to the situation where everything's destroyed. And that does actually happen in some reality. But it may not happen in your reality, but there should be something in your reality that indicates that an earthquake happens on that time. We actually did an earthquake experiment along this lines involving LAX. We did an experiment, we're looking at LAX, and we picked up, that's Los Angeles International Airport, we picked up what looked like a horrific, devastating earthquake. Multiple remote viewers got the same thing 6 months out. I did the analysis, and I said, based on what it looks like on the ground, they were pretty much ready, picking things up and putting things back together. It looks like this earthquake happened some months before. So I drew up a probability curve based on what the remote viewing data looked like on the ground, and I said, if the time frame that the remote viewers were supposed to be looking at was a date in December. So I said, this looks like this earthquake happened at the end of July. So I put up a probability curve that maxed out at the very last couple days in July. Okay, and this was done in June. This is 2008. And then, lo and behold, at the end of July, there was a 5.8 magnitude earthquake in Los Angeles, which was very significant. It knocked out the cell phone system because everybody was shook up and they were all calling each other to see if everybody was safe. Was it as devastating as some of the remote viewing data suggested? No, it wasn't. But damn it, we hit it right on the exact day based on looking at the timing in that worst case scenario. So that was really interesting. And then when you look at our climate project data, you get totally unpredictable things, such as the weather goes bonkers by 2013, and much more rare than once in a lifetime, significant, potentially devastating meteor events before June 1st, 2013, and we got both of them. The details are different, but the essence, the big sort of descriptors, was dead on. So we learned something about the remote viewing process. We learned something about predicting the future. You can only predict it in a probabilistic sense. And we learned something about what we can do going forward. So if we do have a similar experience, a similar type of project, even you, looking at our results, will be able to say, okay, Farsight projects, if they're picking up something, now I know how to interpret it. The details are going to be different, but if it's big, the essence will be correct. And that's really valuable knowing, going forward in terms of how to use remote viewing.
Okay, that's all I got. That's all I was wondering about.
Anyway, that's what we did. If all of your listeners, if you can reemphasize, we have no way to communicate with you outside our free newsletter. And so if you were waiting till June 1st for the tsunamis, you didn't get the newsletter that came out on February 16th. It says it's over. There will be no more meteors and no more tsunamis. By the way, you should also note that the first 6 months of the year was an extraordinary 6 months with respect to meteors. DA14 was not discovered until December of 2012. The Russian meteorite was not known until it hit. But there's been a flurry of big meteors, both near misses and, a lot of significant meteors, fireballs through the sky that was totally unknown to mainstream science, that we would be passing through this area of high meteors. And secondly, some of the meteors have been impacting the moon, and a few of them have been so big as impacts, they were visible by just amateurs and also professional astronomers, but just amateurs with their naked eye, without any telescope at all, just looking at the moon saying, wow, what just hit it? So this has been a much more rare than once in a lifetime period with respect to meteors. And if you were to ask any astronomers in 2008 if the meteor content of our skies would be any different in the first half of 2013, they would laugh and say, no, it'll be the same as it always is. So what's happened the first 6 months on a meteor level has been really extraordinary. And the fact that it matches up in essence with the climate project data, that meteor events were expected, is really interesting. And we've learned a lot, not just about the remote viewing process, but about how to use remote viewing to describe the general essence of what is coming.
Courtney, I have a question. So one of the ways remote viewing is used commonly is something called ARV, associative remote viewing,
Yes.
where you essentially have choices, or you attach something to something else. It could be a taste, it could be two pictures, and this is routinely used for investments or gambling, things like that.
Yeah.
Most of our listeners, I think, are aware of this, but basically you would, let's say, have a sporting event, two choices, and then two pictures that you're later going to see, and which one happens. What is your view of how that plays out? Is this part of your
Well,
multiple timeline
yeah,
scenario?
there is an issue. There is an issue with that. Nobody's made, no one's become independently wealthy with ARV. There have been a few instances where they had a string of successes and earned some money, some significant money. But it's not repeated. They do it again and it doesn't work. And so,
well, wait a minute. I think that Marty Rosenblatt is the most famous for doing this, and he's done. I mean, his teams. He's got a bunch of teams, but I think they've done probably. They must have 10,000 sessions under their belt, something like that. I think they're high 60% kind of range. 60.
no, you're correct when you said 60%, but not high 60s. So they get on average a little better than chance, but it's not great. And they're not making...
I agree with you. It's not great, but I'm pretty sure it's over 60. But anyway, okay.
It's in the 60s, but it's not high 60s. And the point is that they have some success with it, but it's never getting higher than that. The issue is, and I've had long discussions about this with Marty, and he disagrees. He thinks that it's possible that the remote viewers just get better and things like that. But the reality is that what they're doing is associative remote viewing, and that's where you say, we're going to look at a sporting event. If team 1 wins, then remote view the Eiffel Tower. If team 2 wins, then remote view the Titanic sinking or something, things like that. And that is, you're associating the event that you want to look at with two different targets. Now, one of the things I've had long discussions about with Marty, and we don't see eye to eye, is that this is an extension of an early experiment that is now pretty much discredited, that was developed in the remote viewing scientific literatures years ago. And that was to pick a target out of 5. And that is where you have remote viewing sessions done to describe one of 5 targets. Now, there are 5 things that one target is real, the one they're supposed to describe, and the other 4 are decoys. Now, the session is then given to blind judges. Now, that means that the judges aren't told which is the real target. Now, the real target was chosen by some dynamic event, like a computer program that picks one of the 5 targets, that just says, okay, number 2, that's the one. All right. Now, the judges aren't told what the computer said is the right target. So the judges then look at the remote viewing data, and they compare the remote viewing data to all 5 targets, and they say which one matches the data closest. And what they get is they get some, on a statistical basis over time, they get a success rate, meaning it actually does work, but it's not a perfect success rate. It's not even close to being perfect, but they do get a notable success rate that's statistically significant over time. But what they also get are really good sessions of the other targets, meaning somebody will remote view and give a really good session for target 4, but the computer said to remote view target 2. So that's considered a miss. But like all 5 targets are totally unique, what the heck is that happening? Why are they giving a really good description of one of the 5 things? I mean, that's like right off the scale. How could that happen? So the reason that experimental design has been discredited is they didn't understand that there was information leakage and that the experimental design was corrupted, meaning they didn't understand what was making a target a target. Now we know what makes a target a target. What makes it so that a viewer actually perceives one thing and not another? Why is the focus of perception on one place or one object and not something else? And what we found out is the focus of perception of the remote viewer is determined by the first person who compares the targets with the actual data. Their remote viewer is doing the session for the intent of satisfying the informational needs of the analyst, the person who's actually comparing the data to the targets. Well, at the time that the analyst is doing that, the analyst has all 5 targets on her or his mind. The analyst is looking at all 5 targets and comparing the remote viewing data to it. So all 5 targets are legitimate choices. And the computer that picked number 2 is totally irrelevant to the process. It doesn't even matter. So why does the correct target on a statistical basis over a long time with many runs end up being sort of statistically significant? It's because in the end, there's a little bit more emphasis to the correct target, because after the results come back and the people are told that the correct target was number 2, then there's more people focusing on number 2, and the judges are going back over their notes and looking at the session again to seeing if they see any evidence of number 2. So there's a little bit more of a connection there. So what we have is what causes the viewer to focus on one target versus another is there's a telepathic connection between the remote viewer at the time they're doing the session and the analyst at the time they're analyzing the session and comparing it with the target. So a properly done experimental design will not have multiple targets in the person's mind, in the analyst's mind. You have to get rid of that. That's why that experimental design has been discredited. It's corrupted. It actually corrupts the actual data collection process itself. Now, when you're dealing with associative remote viewing, as you just did, you're actually dealing with an aspect of that same problem. If team 1 wins, then you'll remote view the Eiffel Tower. If team 2 wins, you remote view the sinking of the Titanic, something like that, okay? Well,
right.
If you're doing that, you're doing the sessions, and then you give them to an analyst. And then the analyst has a picture of the Eiffel Tower and a picture of the sinking of the Titanic. Well, you did those sessions with the intent of satisfying the informational needs of that analyst. And that analyst has both of those targets on in the mind. And so the remote viewer could legitimately remote view either one of them and still be correct. And in some version of a future reality, either one of them is correct. Meaning in some future reality, team 1 wins. In another future reality, team 2 wins. So what you're getting is a corrupted experiment. On average, if you do it enough times, you will get some success. Why? After this stuff is over, then you look and say, oh, so team 1 win. Well, let's look at my data again. You go back and you check. So you have a little, by that time you drop the sinking of the Titanic target. You're just looking at the Eiffel Tower target. And so you're focusing more on the Eiffel Tower target and looking back at the data, at the remote viewing data. So you're giving a little bit more of a telepathic punch to what turns out to be the correct target. So over time, if you do this experiment a lot, you'll get some significant results. But I have seen some of those ARV sessions that you're talking about, and what they don't tell you is that there are some really great sessions that describe the wrong target. That's called the displaced target phenomenon. And that's what's wrong with the ARV approach in general. It doesn't acknowledge the science that's been discovered since then. On the other hand, on average, it will continue to work over and over and over again because of that little bit of extra emphasis. And sometimes, every once in a while, there'll be a string where they make some money, significant money, every once in a while. But then they do it again and it won't work. So it's this sort of tempting lure of gold around the corner where they keep repeating themselves over and over and over again. But the reality is there's informational leakage in the design. The theory that we've developed here is that there is no one single future. So it is impossible to deterministically predict that single future. I don't care how good the remote viewers are. They can be perfect. They have no trouble remote viewing past events with really high accuracy. But when it comes to the future, there will always be a distribution. The details will be wrong, but the essence will be correct. That means that if you're basing your prediction on the essence, on average, you'll be okay. but there's going to be, you know, you won't ever get those probabilities up into the 80s and 90s with that. And nobody could. Even if you're an advanced extraterrestrial species, nobody could. It's impossible, because at every moment of the now, you're going to have multiple futures. That means there is no single future. You can't predict a single future because it does not exist. Now, you know, this is something that's really hard to wrap your head around. Even physicists, as of currently, 82% of all physicists have such a difficult time wrapping their head around this, they reject it. But the fact that we are now up to 18% of physicists who do accept it, it tells us where the trend is.
Let me ask you this. In that light, what do you think about Ed Dame's solar kill shot sessions and stuff like that?
I don't know a single person that has ever seen those so-called sessions. In a court of law, that would be considered hearsay, meaning if you say that somebody, let's say you go to a mechanic, and the mechanic fixes your car, charges you money for it, and then you find out that the mechanic didn't do it right and refuses to redo it. So you take it to another mechanic, and that other mechanic says, oh gosh, they put the valves in backwards. The valve seals, they're backwards. I have to redo the whole thing. And then he fixes it, and then you drive the car, and it's perfect now. So you say, look, I got to sue the first guy to get my money back. So you write this letter telling the judge exactly what happened. So then you find the guy and you sue them, and you go before the judge. And the judge, and you say, look, this guy fixed my car. He did a lousy job. He put the valve seals backwards. And here's a letter from the next mechanic who did it right, who says what he did, and it's better now, and I want my money back from the first guy. You know what the judge is going to say? He's going to throw it out. He's going to say, no, this is hearsay. This is just a letter. I have to actually see the second mechanic to interrogate him. You can't just say somebody said it. Okay? So now let's go to your example that you just said. You can't get on late night radio and just say there's going to be something happening. You actually have to be like the judge. You have to say, where are the sessions? What are the remote viewers that did it? What is their track record? Let me see the track record. Let me see who they are. What are the let me see the evidence that they've done good stuff in the past over many years. You have to see everything. You have to be from Missouri, the show me state. You can't just say somebody's on you know, late night radio and says there's going to be this, and by the way, there's going to be a new seminar. If you want to know where the safe zones are, pay this amount. I mean, that's just crazy. So you have to actually say it. Now, I'm not saying that there's not going to be coronal mass ejections. I'm just saying that the whole idea of saying stuff without having massive informational disclosure is stupid. I mean, it's ridiculous, and nobody should go along with it. And I don't know personally anybody that takes those discussions really seriously. Now, I have to admit, though, it's not hard to predict that the sun is going to do something like that. So that, you know, those predictions of a major coronal mass ejection are going to eventually be correct, but it's not necessarily because of any of these remote viewing things, because I haven't seen them. Maybe the remote viewing data that you're talking about were well done. Maybe they're correct, but even then it's going to be a probabilistic future, and I haven't heard of anybody presenting that stuff in a probabilistic way. They're presenting it, as far as I've heard, it's been presented as a deterministic way. So you don't have even a science behind it. So I personally, I mean, if you want to see how these coronal mass ejections work, they actually do affect our planet a lot. And every few thousand years, all of humanity is driven to a pulp because of them. A good way to see this is to read Robert Schoch's book. Schoch is S-C-H-O-C-H. And Robert M. Schoch is a professor at Boston University. He has a PhD in geophysics, I believe from Yale. And he has written a recent book called Forgotten Civilization. I believe it came out in 2012. And he details a huge amount of information indicating that major solar events happen quite regularly in historic time, like every few thousand years. And for example, the ruins in Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which is, you know, hundreds of acres big. I mean, it's huge. And the people who carved their buildings out of stone had a technology and a capability of building at least equivalent to those who built the pyramids. And like 10, 12,000 years ago, they buried themselves in those buildings, meaning they covered the buildings up as if they were trying to protect themselves from something raining from the skies, like some solar event. And if you go back in time enough, and oh, by the way, in the Göbekli Tepe ruins date back 10, 12,000 years. So it's way beyond what traditional archaeologists say is the beginning of civilization 3,000 years ago. So, but there's real, and so Robert M. Schoch's book is a good place to begin to see that these things happen regularly. We had a mini one happen in 1859 called the Carrington event, and it electrocuted a few people on telegraph wires. It did major damage to telegraph wires, burned a few buildings down, had inch-long sparks fly out of the telegraph wires. It was a major event. If that happened today, and it will happen, it's going to happen not necessarily today, but the fact that it's going to happen in the not too distant future, because it statistically happens on a regular basis. But if that mini one happened, that happened in 1859, happened today, we'd be back in the Stone Age immediately, and it would take us years to recover. Why? Because we rely on a constant source of electricity for the entire planet. And something like that, if that happened, a big coronal mass ejection sends an electromagnetic pulse out that would fry the transformers minimally that deliver our power all throughout everywhere on the planet. Those big canister things that you see on the top of telephone poles, well, those are transformers. And a coronal mass ejection of the type we got in 1859 would fry those things. There is not a planetary reserve of new ones. The factories that make them would take about a year to produce new ones, and those factories would be popped as well. So it would be many years before we got the electricity turned back on. So, you know, to say that there's going to be a major coronal mass ejection type of thing, you don't have to know remote viewing in order to say that. It's going to happen no matter what. But in order to be able to talk about this stuff in the way that we talk about it at Farsight, you have to actually have the data, extensively show the data, extensively show the viewers. I mean, are these viewers good viewers, bad viewers? Let me see their history. Let me see their record. What other experiments have they participated in? Let's see those experiments, public track record of anything. And I personally haven't seen any of that, nor do I know anybody who's seen any of that. So I personally would rather, you know, and eventually such a prediction, as I said, will come true because of the way the sun works. It could happen tomorrow, it could happen a month from now, it could happen 10 years from now, it could happen 20 years from now, but it's going to happen because it happens. And we are a very vulnerable society with respect to electronic stuff. We're very, very, very vulnerable.
Hey, Courtney, I think this is a good way to segue into your Atlantis project because basically you're talking about massive disasters and such driven from technological weaknesses. So if you wouldn't mind, why don't you give us a little short overview of the Atlantis project?
Sure. The Atlantis project is actually our most recent, and it's one of our most interesting projects. And as with all of our projects, we have all of the data available for free on our website. All of the sessions are available for looking at. The track record of all of our viewers is available for public viewing. These people have done many projects with us. You have sessions going back many years for many projects. You can see their accuracy, the whole thing. These particular viewers that we use for the Atlantis project also are good artists, meaning they draw well. So it's not just words we're talking about pictures. People really need to see things in order to understand them. So this is a really optimal project for us. So basically, let me tell you how this thing started. We have, and I encourage you to be skeptical. I encourage you to say, you know, what is this really all about? Because look at the sessions, look at the people. We also have a DVD that brings everything together, and you can watch the first 15 minutes of it for free on our website just by, on the home page, there's a big banner near the top saying Atlantis, the true story. Click on that, you can see the first 15 minutes. Also, we have a data page, this third link on the nav bar at farsight.org, Click on that, you'll be at the data page for the Atlantis project. And there's also a Watch Now button, so you can actually see the first 15 minutes, which gives the full background for the whole project. And you can also see all the sessions there for free. They're right there. We always have all of the sessions up on our website as PDF files, easily readable by anybody on any computer, anywhere in the world, all the time. So that's, we're a nonprofit. We always show all of our data. So if you disagree with us, it's okay. You can, because you're looking at the original data. How can you disagree with something that you don't really see, that you just hear somebody talking about or hear someone talking about on late night radio? How can you disagree with that? I mean, you can't look at it. But here, you can actually see everything. So this is important. If you go to our data page, third link on the nav bar, Atlantis, scroll down, you'll see a couple anomalies on the bottom of the ocean at Google Earth. This was not originally called Atlantis. Originally, this was what are those situations? So 1,000 miles west of Morocco and Portugal, you have 3 miles deep in the Atlantic Ocean, an anomaly that sure enough looks like an ancient city, huge, 1/4 the size of Portugal, on the bottom of the ocean, like the ruins all covered in sediment. And early oceanographers were saying, oh, that's ship tracks. Well, I know what ship tracks are. So you see, Google Earth underwater imagery is collected by ships that are under contract by the United States Navy. And they use sonar to read the bottom of the ocean. And normally what they do is they go in overlapping, parallel, back and forth trips in order to get a large area of the ocean bottom. If they don't do that, but just go off in one direction, what you get is something that looks like railroad tracks, where you have two exactly parallel lines, and in the middle, you have high resolution, really clear imagery from the sonar that's directly underneath where the ship was traveling. And outside of those two parallel lines is totally foggy and fuzzy. So it's absolutely clear. Two parallel lines with super clear stuff in the middle and super foggy, fuzzy stuff outside of those two parallel lines. And the lines are straight. Drunken captains that produce wavy ship tracks are not allowed. So you have straight lines that have two parallel edges, clear stuff, really clear stuff in the middle, really bad fuzzy stuff outside of that. So I looked at this anomaly on the bottom of the ocean that these oceanographers were saying were ship tracks, and I said, they gotta be kidding. Those aren't ship tracks. Are you serious? No idiot would think those are ship tracks. Those things clearly are elevation changes on the bottom of the ocean. They're not straight. They don't have two parallel edges. There's not clear resolution in the middle with fuzzy stuff on the outside. Those aren't ship tracks, in my opinion. So I simply disagreed with the oceanographers who were saying they were ship tracks. Well, so I said, this is good enough to start a project. I also found an anomaly. There's lots of underwater anomalies, but I picked two. There's also another one down off the coast of Antarctica that looks like a checkerboard of holes in the ground. And they're perfectly arranged in rectangular holes, just like a checkerboard with columns and so on, and rows. And I said, what's that? It's clearly artificial. Somebody was digging holes in the ground. And so I said, let me use those two Google Earth images and send the remote viewers in to see, under totally blind conditions, what those are. I picked two of our very best remote viewers that have an enormous track record at Farsight. A public track record. It's not something you have to agree with me on. You can look at their sessions going back with many projects for many years and see what it's like. Dick Allgaier was one of them, and Deborah Duggan-Takagi was another. And so I had them go after these two things under totally blind conditions. They didn't know anything about what I was tasking them. They just knew that there was a target, go look at it, and they got the instructions to go look at it by a non-leading email, so they couldn't even hear my voice or see the inflections on my face. They just said, there's a target, remote view it, send me the session. And they did it. Now, I had 7 targets, but let's talk about the first 6. 3 targets was for the thing in the Atlantic Ocean, 1,000 miles west of Morocco and Portugal, 3 miles deep, that looked like a city. And 3 targets were for the Antarctic target. So the Atlantic target we call the Atlantic grid, because it sort of looks like a grid. And the Antarctic target, because it looks like a rectangular checkerboard, we call the Antarctic grid. So the Atlantic grid is that thing up near Portugal and Morocco, and the Antarctic grid is that thing off the coast of Antarctica. So the three targets were as follows. They're the same for each location. What is down at the bottom of, I'm speaking colloquially now, but in essence it is, what is down at the bottom of the ocean now? What is that? Okay? The second target is, what did that look like before it got to the bottom of the ocean? Meaning, when it was in its prime, what was that thing before it was on the bottom of the ocean? The third target was, what was happening at that spot at the moment it started to go into the water? Meaning, when the transition was happening, when it was going from being above to below the water, what was it? So we got that three different time perspectives of what those two places were. Same thing for the Atlantic grid and the Antarctic grid location. So we found out who they were, what they were doing, what happened to them, and when it happened. We found out the whole story. It's an unbelievable but fascinating, and I'd bet anything on it. It's totally true, in my opinion. Now, when we were finishing up, and I'll get to some of the results, but when we were finishing up the remote viewing, it's about a year into the process. When we were finishing up the remote viewing about a year into the process, Google Earth came out with Google Earth Underwater Imagery 2.0. And as you can imagine, most of the anomaly was erased. Now, it wasn't erased entirely, but it was vastly diminished, not so glaringly obvious. So some of the oceanographers said, see, everything's been fixed now. And so I said, I looked at it, and I looked at a new version, and I said, boy, nothing's been fixed in my opinion. The only thing that happened was that very high compression algorithms were applied to the ocean data, thus smoothing it out. And the evidence of this is that there are large patches in the new Google Earth imagery that have no color gradients, meaning there's no color variation, none. And those patches are very large, and they follow the pixel lines. That's the evidence that there was high compression involved. So high compression does that. So whenever you have any image, like of your Aunt Matilda, if you keep compressing that image, you're going to not see Aunt Matilda anymore, because what it does is it gives adjoining pixels the same value. Now with Google Earth, you have to deal with high compressed images, but if you compress them too much, you'll lose the detail. And so I am not saying that any individual, institution, or anybody else corrupted the Google Earth data or conspired to corrupt the Google Earth data. All I'm saying is that these are governmental data, and the government can do anything they want with them before any individual or institute gets their hands on them. And I personally don't believe any authoritative statement about any image. Even a teenage Photoshopper can do stuff with images these days. So I like to do my own thinking for them. So I'm not accusing anyone of purposely corrupting the data. What I'm saying is that I don't believe any image at face value, and I like to get my own explanation for it. So this was a perfect remote viewing project. If you'd like, I can actually go into what we actually found at this point.
Yes, I think that's the important point.
Now, I know some people are asking me about, on this chat thing, about other areas, like off the Bahamas and stuff like that, and pyramids, and there's a lot of underwater imagery everywhere. We didn't do that. It takes us, like, this project was in the works for 2 years. It takes us, like, a long time just to resolve 2 places. You know, so to get all these other targets, like off the Bahamas and off of India and other places, that's more work than we can do. So, but we're doing more work in this field than anybody else is doing, and the findings that we are finding are more amazing than anything you're being taught in the university about past history of humanity. So we're doing pretty good for a volunteer group. Anyway, so what we basically found out was that the society that we're looking at that created those two places was a technologically advanced society. They were us, our ancestors. They were a technologically advanced society that was about 100 years more advanced than we are. They were close, meaning we and them were very close. The Atlantic grid area was a living urban area. Think of New York City in the 1940s and 50s. Why do I say then? Because that's what the architecture looked like. They had vaulted ceilings, they had arches. Think of Grand Central Station. Think of Penn Central, things like that. That's what the architecture would like. But they also had escalators and moving ramps. Think of New York City during rush hour. Millions of people rushing around, busy, having very interesting lives. Someone just texted me and said, has the military shown interest in this work? The military follows our work very, very closely. The military guys are on the board of directors. I mean, yes, they follow our work. And, you know, we know for a fact that everything that we do, they look at with extreme interest. So, you know, anyway, so this Atlantis, I mean, they're on our board of directors, for heaven's sake. So this Atlantis thing has an extreme interest to us because this was a situation in which that society, if you were there today, you would feel very comfortable. You know, if you go to Rome, the buildings look a little different, but you know, you feel like you're in a different country. The language you don't understand, the clothing is a little different, the mannerisms a little different, but you know you're in a human populace. You know you're just in another country, and it's sort of exciting. That's what it would have felt like, you walking around on that Atlantic grid area. If in its prime, it was just a place, and you would have noticed that the language was different, the clothing was a little different, but you would have felt very much at home with it, like in the here and now. Now, the Antarctic grid area, when it was in its prime, was different. They didn't have the sort of older architecture that we like to associate with Penn Station or Grand Central Station, with the vaulted ceilings and the arches and stuff. They had architecture that was very similar to our more modern architecture, which is angular, so that you had skyscraper type things. But they had buildings that had as many floors above ground as below ground. It was a military, industrial, scientific complex down in Antarctica. That's what it was. And it wasn't all snow and ice like it is today. So we've had a number of climatic changes since then. We've gone through a number of different ice ages and thawing and everything. So what was down there was not all ice and snow. And they basically had experiments going in that realm that were secrecy cloaked science. Now, they had a form of energy back in those days that was crystalline in nature, and they had reactors, but they were much cleaner than our nuclear reactors. They could power the whole planet on these very clean crystalline forms of energy. But they were also doing something else. They were trying to actually do an experiment that was a secrecy cloaked experiment where they were trying to drill through the crust. Now I'm going to say something that all of you perhaps may find sort of shocking, but it's true. This planet is a lousy planet to have a civilization on. You may say, oh no, this is Earth, our beloved Earth. This planet is nuts to have a civilization on here. This planet should be used only for a botanical and zoological garden, but not for a long-term civilization. A long-term civilization needs 1 million years, say, of uninterrupted peace in order to do it. Our planet is 8,000-mile diameter ball of molten liquid lava. And it's got an 8-mile thick crust on top of all of that. And we have, every 26,000 years, we have magnetic pole shifts that disrupt everything. We have earthquakes, we have volcanoes, and we have solar events, as documented by Robert M. Schoch's book, Forgotten Civilization, that basically crunch humanity back down to zero. And if you look at Michael Cremo's book, Forbidden Archaeology, you see that humanity has lived with anatomically correct humans walking around on this place for millions of years. And all of this is kept out of mainstream college courses in archaeology and anthropology, but that's another issue. Mainstream archaeologists and anthropologists are connecting the dots of only the dots that they will allow to be seen. There are tremendous findings that are well documented in, say, Michael Cremo's book, Forbidden Archaeology, and Forgotten Civilization by Robert Schoch, but other sources as well. There's a whole cottage industry out there of anomalies out there that the mainstream archaeologists and anthropologists simply refuse to look at. And so what we basically have is a situation in which the evidence clearly indicates that humanity can't survive on this planet more than a few thousand years before something happens, and then it has to build itself up from nothing. And there's almost no memory of anything that happened in the past. So what happened with the Atlantean situation, or what we're calling Atlantis now, because it sort of matches what legends have talked about, is that society, just by random luck, had enough time to pull itself together and develop a level of technology similar to what we have now. Actually, a little bit better than what we have now, but not much. And what they did with that is do secrecy cloak science exactly the same way we do it. They are us. They are our ancestors. And they drilled some holes into the planet's crust in an attempt to get to the molten lava, the heat down below. And what happened was they thought they could contain it, but when you see a volcano pop, it's basically a small vent of lava that comes up through cracks and develops into a pool, and it's the pool that sort of pops after a lot of pressure. It's not a direct hole to the center. What they did is they drilled huge, big holes with big boring devices straight through the crust into the lava. And they blew a hole in the side of the planet. They basically popped the balloon. No volcano does that. And they had an eruption that was, according to the remote viewing data, just about the size of Australia. It was huge. And we actually know where it happened. Why do we know where it happened? There's a couple pieces of information. The area that sunk was when you have a lot of lava coming out of one side, you're going to have to crumple the earth somewhere else in order to, the vacuum, in order to, where does that lava go? So anything that comes out one side, you're going to get a wrinkle on the other side. So the area that we now call the Atlantic grid is the area that sinks. Now, the way this works is that it's the antipode of the location where the explosion happened. So if they pop the hole in one side of the planet, the part that will sink will be the exact opposite that. So let's look at the Atlantis anomaly, the Atlantic grid that's 1,000 miles west of Morocco and Portugal, 3 miles deep. You take the globe and you say, what's exactly opposite that on the globe? And what you get is an area called the Admiralty that's east of and off the coast of Sydney, Australia, between Sydney, Australia, and New Zealand, that area, around that area. That area also has the thinnest crust on the planet, and it also has the highest concentration of gray volcanic rock on the planet. It's the largest concentration. That's where the explosion happened. Now, mainstream science actually gives us a very interesting piece of information here. They are also looking for a very severe volcanic eruption of some type that killed off all human life except for 2, 3, 4, 6,000 pairs of survivors. Those are breeding pairs. There might have been more survivors, but they weren't having babies. So of the survivors, they're looking for just 2, 3, 4, 6,000 pairs and a volcanic event that caused a nuclear winter and killed off everybody else. Now, a normal volcano can't do that. So they're looking for an extraordinary volcano, and normal volcanoes are not that way. The only difference between mainstream science looking for this volcano and us is that we're knowing that it's not a natural volcano. It was a man-made, created thing. But what they have determined is that this event happened 70,000 years ago. And they refer to it as the Toba catastrophe theory, TOBA, Tango Oscar Bravo Alpha. So you look up Toba catastrophe theory in Wikipedia, and you can read about it. And what they think, Toba is referred to because of Lake Toba. They think the volcano happened in Indonesia and Lake Toba, where there is a volcano. But the reality is it probably happened east of Sydney, around the New Zealand area, because that's where all the volcanic rock is, and that's also the thinnest part of the crust. And it's also the antipode of the area that sunk, which we have very clear Google Earth imagery of in the so-called Atlantic grid target. So that's where it actually happened. And we know because of the genetic evidence that it happened exactly 70,000 years ago. And all of us on the planet, all of us, everyone talking here on this interview and everybody else, whether you're Aborigine, African, Caucasian, European, Asian, Native American, whatever, we're all related to the same 2, 3, 4, 6,000 pairs of breeding survivors that survived that 70,000 years ago. So, in a nutshell, I've talked quickly, and you've been very patient with me, not interrupting me, letting me get everything out, or getting a lot out. That's the essence of what happened. So we know who they are, they were us, our ancestors, where they were, those two locations, what their level of development was, about 100 years more than us. We know that because the remote viewing data clearly shows them. For example, we have the controlling part for that experiment actually occurred in the Antarctic grid facility. And it was a huge facility with tons of people, big buildings and everything. Much of that whole infrastructure sunk to the bottom of the ocean. And the holes that we see at the bottom of the ocean in that checkerboard grid were actually parts of a mining operation. So they were digging in those spots. That's how the holes actually got there. But one of the reasons you have so many military and governmental digs going on, there's a lot of facilities, not just U.S., but also Russian. There's a lot of people, going through hardship conditions, doing digs in governmental projects, military projects in Antarctica. And the reason is they're not looking for mastodon bones or rocks that they can put in a natural history museum. They're looking for technology because a lot of it is at the bottom of the ocean, but a lot of it's underneath the ice. And it's not that hard. It's easier to chip away at the ice and actually look at the technology than it is to go 3 miles down in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Morocco and Portugal. That we haven't, that's harder for us to get to than believe it or not, than the cold conditions of Antarctica. But that's why there's so much activity, secret activity in Antarctica. There's actually a little cottage industry of people who follow it. They look at old Google Earth pictures and they note these things, and they look at new Google Earth pictures and they know they've been brushed out. They see the smudging, and there's a whole interesting cottage industry of people who follow these excavations that are going on in Antarctica. But there's a bunch of them. So we know who they are and what they were doing. And by the way, when the actual event happened, they had about 5 days to come to grips with that. They actually saw on their machinery, they had flat panel TVs and big rooms that looked like NASA control banks. And some of the operators didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. Some of the operators started to pray for the first time. They started to announce to the throngs, literally thousands of people who were gathering on the surface, in loudspeakers, telling them, confessing what had happened. And they knew it was a possible extinction level event. In the Atlantic grid realm, they actually tried to mount a rescue of some people. They put women on boats, not old women, but women who were fecund, capable of bearing children, pregnant, childbearing women. And the only men they allowed on the boats were ones who were needed to sail the boats. They were trying to save the species as much as they could. And in fact, a few thousand people did survive, and here we are today to talk about it. But it's a fascinating story. The entire story with all of the details, all placed out in chronological order. Those last 5 days are unbelievable. And the graphics among these remote viewers are spectacular to see it. Also on the DVD, you get all of this on the DVD, plus you get a live session done by Dick Algar. It's to die for to actually see it. He's actually describing what's at the bottom of the ocean right now, and he's looking at it and describing it, and you know the target, but he doesn't know the target, and to see him actually go through the whole thing, describing what's on the bottom of the ocean, is just riveting.
Courtney, Neil here. Can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
Given that it seems that your work in viewing the past, you relate to history keeps repeating itself, and we seem to be going through something very similar now.
Yeah.
So, would you be able, or would the RVing process be able to offer any possible solution that we could quit this crazy cycle, or is it beyond
Absolutely.
our grasp?
Look, absolutely. Neil, look, I am a scientist. I love science. I'm a mathematician. I'm a scientist. Science is what I do. I live for it. What I don't like is secrecy cloaked science. Mind you, all those governmental officials, we even know we have it's really clear in the remote viewing data, they had a civilian leader like a president. He was led with his advisors by military people to a secure bunker when this thing started to go belly up. Nobody survived except for the few thousand surviving pairs. The president died, the military people died, the scientists who were doing the experiment, they all died. So what have we learned from this? Secrecy cloaked science turns out badly. Now, when we were all running around hunting and foraging, there was very little that we could do to destroy the planet. But when you get a sufficiently advanced level of technology, you can destroy the planet. And a level of responsibility comes with that. And secrecy cloaked science means you can't go off and do what you want and just hide it from everybody. That's like saying in your home, your child could do anything she or he wants to do in the home without any respect for the rest of the family. For example, take your car and take it to a pawn shop and sell it. I mean, you can't do things like that. Secrecy cloaked stuff doesn't work anymore. And so it's okay when we're primitive, but when we have this level of technology, it doesn't work. And so scientists and powers that be and industrial people, they like secrecy cloaked science because they don't want to have to deal with the public. Dealing with the public means bureaucracy, prying eyes, it means delays, added expense, and mostly it means having to explain complicated science to the masses who will misunderstand it. So,
well, if I may say,
go ahead.
Does it not present a bit of a dichotomy to you and your RVing group to have the military, on the board of directors? Given that you care not for
the military is not of one mind with regard to all of these things. They're Americans and people just like you and I. So they're not of one mind. And but on the other hand, I will freely confess to you that there were certain projects that we cannot do, and we will not do. But I also think you don't.
I've heard you say this before. Yes.
Yeah, we can't do a project on 911, the World Trade Center stuff. We can't do a project on TWA Flight 800. We can't do a project on who killed Jack Kennedy. We just simply can't do those things. But there's a lot that we can do.
Have you been told directly by them not to do it?
I've dealt with military people for the better part of 2 decades. Some things they told me directly, and some things they don't need to tell me because it's so obvious. We're still operating because we go after projects. They like what we do. Actually, not everybody likes what we do, but they're not of one mind. There's a large section of the intelligence community and others that really sort of think of us as a planetary resource. And there are others that sort of wish we would go away, but they're split. But if we started going after things that we know that they did not want us to do, we'd be out of business in a minute. I mean, they could close us down in a blink of an eye.
And so could you offer, to get back to the Atlantis project, any viable solutions to help
Secrecy
humanity
cloaked
quit.
science is on. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, to help humanity to quit this crazy cycle, you know, of destruction, destruction, destruction.
This secrecy cloaked science is a public educational effort, meaning the public has to be educated and the people who do the experiments have to be educated. The point is that with all of the problems associated with public experiments, there is no escape. Once you have a level of technology that can do what we now know actually happened, literally everybody died, you now realize that you have a level of responsibility and it's just no alternative. So you have to make the investment in explaining things to the public. Now, normally, industry and scientists lie. So they like doing what they want to do, and they tell the lies to the public. So this whole thing of changing our culture to talk about the real risks of things has to be something we have to grow into. We do public experiments at the Farsight Institute as an example of public participation in scientific research. And yes, there are many misunderstandings. Many people didn't understand our climate project. They didn't understand that we were going after general correlations and that the details would be wrong, even though we said it in the beginning. They didn't understand that when we came out with our results and gave our announcement on February 16th that there'd be no more Meteor data because the Meteor events had been met by our data, by the actual facts have matched the essence of what we were looking at, and we said there would be no more meteors through June 1st. Come around June 1st, people were still saying, were there tsunamis? I mean, they didn't understand, and we had to explain it again. And then after we explained it, they looked at us and say, yeah, and where were the tsunamis? And we had to explain it again. So this is the cost of doing public experiments. But mainstream science and industry people, they lie. Point blank. I mean, I'm an academic, and I'll tell you, I have seen more academics lie than you can spit at. I mean, it is not uncommon. And one of the things they lie about, for example, is, oh, this is just crazy stuff you're talking about. These nuclear power plants are perfectly safe. We know what we're doing, and you don't know what you're doing. You're just an idiot. And, you know, leave it up to us. You'll have free or really inexpensive electricity for years on out. Leave it up to us scientists. And then Fukushima Daiichi shows, you know, what happened. And all of the nuclear power plants that are built are based on the same principle. They have swimming pools on every one of these nuclear power plants. And the swimming pools hold the nuclear rods that they are used, and they don't have any place to put them. They can't even launch them in a space shuttle and put them into the sun, because if even one space shuttle blew up, all life on Earth would be destroyed because they contain plutonium. So, you know, the issue is that if we were to have a coronal mass ejection that cut off the power of the planet, and that will happen, that's not an if. I don't know when it will happen, but it will happen. And when it does happen, those nuclear power plants are going down. And a few days later, those swimming pools that hold those rods are going to be bone dry.
Hey,
and then,
Courtney.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of getting back to the Atlantis project so we don't run out of time. Is there evidence that the two events, the area near Antarctica and the area off of Portugal, that they went down at the same time?
Yes, they went down at the same time. They were part of the same civilization. It was very clear that we're talking about the same people, the same culture. They were different in their characteristics in terms of the architecture. One was a military, industrial, scientific complex down in the Antarctica region, and the other place was more like a large version of New York City, a living, you know, office type of thing that had huge numbers of people going to work every morning, the rush hour traffic. You can see it when we present it sort of picture after picture in the DVD. It's really so clear. They were different types of locations in terms of what they did at those locations, but they were still part of the same culture, and they both sank at the same time.
Now, I think I heard you say something along the lines of they were using a crystal energy source, or
yes,
that was part of it?
This came through the remote viewing very clearly. They had another source of energy. So in one sense, you could say, plain, that why the heck were they drilling into the crust, drilling through the crust of the Earth, if they already had a good source of energy? It wasn't like our nuclear power plants. It was really clean, and they could run it forever. I mean, it was really good. And there was really no need to go after the heat in the center of the Earth. But they did it anyway, and it wasn't everybody who did it. Again, it was a secrecy-cloaked science experiment. That's what I'm opposed to. I'm not opposed to science. I'm just saying at this level of technological achievement, you have to include everybody, whether you want it or not, because of the potential for literally killing everybody, including yourself if you're a scientist. The scientists and the governmental people and the military people, they died too. So it's for everybody's sake.
Okay, another question. So where do you think the actual drilling occurred? Are you arguing that it was
The actual
between
drilling
New Zealand-
occurred in the antipode.
Right.
My best bet for this is that the actual drilling occurred in the antipode of the Atlantic grid. So that anomaly 1,000 miles west of Portugal and Morocco, 3 miles deep, that's the antipode. So
Right.
go
Now,
exactly opposite that, that's where the drilling occurred, which is very, actually, it's just a stone's throw away from the location in Antarctica where the other facility was that we looked at.
Now, do you think there was a civilization, a city or something in that area, or was that essentially a deserted area at the time?
We don't have remote viewing data on that. It's a good question, but it's pretty clear that that's where the spot was at the drilling. That's where the blowout occurred. And, you know, it was a big civilization. I doubt very highly it had 7 billion people on it like we have now. But I'm thinking you're talking at least hundreds of millions.
Well, let's see if...
I would hazard a guess at this point that they probably guessed to put the drilling in a relatively uninhabited area. My guess is that. But of course, the explosion was so big that it didn't matter whether it was relatively uninhabited or not.
And do you have any idea on the type of society it might have been other than technology?
It was like us.
Well, that raises a lot of questions. I mean, you know, we have the legends of the past. We have all the stuff from India. We have more, you know, mystical thought that in the past they had better psychic abilities, for example. You know, that may or may not be the case, but if you read the different Vedas from India, you certainly get the idea that they had the so-called cities and that they were used more in the past. Any idea about the civilization in question? What, you know, again, other than technology, I mean, it had a president, more or less. It had a military-industrial complex, more or less, and it did stupid stuff. So that sounds, like you say, like us.
Yeah.
But what about other things?
Well, let me say this much. One of the reasons we're pushing this remote viewing research so much publicly is that we want to change the planet in a good way so that the understanding of consciousness, it's not that we have a soul. We don't have a soul. We are the soul, and we have a body. And so that understanding that who we are non-physical beings, non-linear, non-physical beings, and we temporarily inhabit these physical bodies in order to experience this level of existence, that needs to come out. Now, right now, we are in a state where we're unable to see that because we have so much intellectual baggage, especially related to a lot of religions, a lot of philosophy, a lot of intellectual ideas that you're exposed even in the universities that sort of prohibit the exposure to these ideas. Now, we can assume that in the Atlantean culture that all of those things, certainly our current religions didn't exist then. There was no Christianity 70,000 years ago, no Islam, no Buddhism, there was no Roman Catholic Church. There was nothing like that back in those days. So we can assume that they might have had a culture that was more open to the type of things we're talking about right now. So yes, could they be more psychically oriented? Absolutely. In fact, some of the remote viewing data did seem to suggest that that was in fact the case. That you had many more people that were psychically oriented, telepathy was well known, Nonlinear thought was well known. Non-physical, non-local thought was well known. That type of stuff that we do with remote viewing was very well known. So there was some evidence in these remote viewing sessions that that was true. But that does not mean that the people were any different than us, inherently. It just means they would have had different intellectual baggage, and their baggage wouldn't have been the same that ours. And hopefully, as we continue our work to educate the public, 10, 15, 20 years from now, we will become a people where these ideas are more accessible to mainstream thinking, and then we will become much more like the Atlanteans in that sense as well. The only thing that stops us is our ideas, the thoughts that we have. The thoughts that we have saying that it's impossible is the only reason that stops it from being possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one other question here is the relationship between these two areas and the event in Toba 70,000 years ago. Other than the genetic idea, is there some other relationship? In the RV sessions, did you see massive, what can we say? Did you see the volcanic eruption all over the Earth, that kind of thing?
Well, they could
I guess what I'm trying to say is
they could clearly see it from the Antarctica region. That means that it had to have been big enough to go way over the horizon. I mean, you could clearly see it from space. It was the actual explosion looked from space the size of Australia. It was huge. They blew a huge hole in the side of the Earth. I mean, if you think of where that spot is in the Atlantic grid, that's 1,000 miles west of Morocco and Portugal. That means you can assume that there was land from that spot on all the way back to Portugal and Morocco. That means all that land sunk in. That's 1,000 miles of stuff. That gives you an idea of how big the explosion was on the other side of the Earth, at the antipode. So
sure,
yeah, they could have seen it. They could have seen it from.
People have other theories that at different times we've had lots of disasters. Maybe there are theories that mountain ranges developed quickly in certain areas, things like that. As a matter of fact, that might even be possible, that the mountains in South America, part of them came from something like Toba.
Well, I don't think the mainstream scientists have the exact location of the volcanic event correct. I don't think it was Toba. But that's what they're saying because there is a volcano there. I think, but it is good that if you look at a globe, Toba is in Indonesia, and Indonesia is just on the opposite side of Australia. So they're in the right ballpark. They're in the right general area of where this thing happened. I'm just thinking that it probably happened off of the east coast of Sydney, because in the direction of New Zealand, that area, because that is one of the thinnest areas of the crust of the planet, and that is the largest concentration of volcanic rock anywhere on the planet. So, and it is also the exact antipode from the spot that's the anomaly at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. So, I mean, if you put that together, I think that's the actual correct spot. But, there are going to be other people who will have other theories about other anomalies. Mind you, we've only looked at those two spots. I'm fully in agreement with you that there's zillions of other places, and people are going to have their own theories. But this is the first example that I know of where absolutely rock-solid evidence with good imagery from Google, with Google Earth, was combined with remote viewing data from two of the best remote viewers existing on the planet. Really solid, with really great long track records, the whole thing, public distribution of everything, public track records of everything. This is the first time all of this has come together and said, this is what happened, these are the people, this is what they were like, this is the exact sequence of events, and there's the evidence on the bottom of the ocean. You can't walk away from it. So this is the first time anything like that has actually been done. This doesn't mean that similar things couldn't be done with other places, but this is a first.
So Courtney, on that note, do you see Atlantis rising, or is it the metaphors and the lessons that you feel you've learned from Atlantis sinking?
The second. Atlantis is not rising. We are the descendants of Atlantis. If you want to say Atlantis is rising, you're looking at it right now because it's us. The civilization has come back. We are the Atlantis rising. We are it. You are it. Plane is it. Disaster Cat is it. Atlantis rising. Here we are. We're back. In fact, in the galaxy, we must be the species that never dies. You can't kill us off. Because this planet is a harbor to live on. Every few thousand years, we get pummeled, and we keep coming back and back and back. And every single time, this has been going on for literally hundreds of millions of years. And here we are. We're still here. And we come back quick. I mean, 70,000 years ago in geological time is not all that back. And boom, here we are. So we must be a bit of folklore in the rest of the galaxy. I'd bet my bottom dollar that we're sort of an amazing case.
Well, we might be a prison planet, right?
Actually, that's another theory and another discussion that we don't have to go into, but I do actually think we've gone through that period, and we may actually be still in the tail end of that period. Yeah, I think if you look at just really quick, and I know we're wrapping up the show, but if you look at all of the reported alien interaction cases that have been, written about, one thing that's really clear in all of them is that all of the extraterrestrial species that are out there have much more homogeneous societies than we do. We have many races, and we have great variety in the types of people that were here. We have probably the highest, I would guess we have the highest concentration of artists, inventors, creative people, musicians, all types of interesting people anywhere in the galaxy in terms of concentration per capita. And I bet we also have the highest concentration of perverts, violent people, and other things. So if you have a civilization that's been out there a million years, the last thing they need is a really creative person. What do creative people want to do? They want to shake things up. So, my guess is that this has ended up being a dumping ground for a lot of societies that simply don't understand their creative people. But they also dump not just the creative people here, but the perverts and the violent as well, which is why we have such a high concentration of very unusual, people here, as well as all the mixture of the different races. This is a very, very mixed place on a planet that shouldn't even have a civilization on it. It's really interesting. So the idea that we are maybe sort of a planet that just sort of never should have happened, but just sort of happened, because it had some uses, that's actually a really legitimate question.
Is it a possibility, and this is just high speculation here, that due to the number of different cultures and personalities and so on and so forth that we have on this planet, and I do agree with you on that assessment, is it a possibility that it does affect so many multiple timelines that you RV?
Say it again.
Well, if you have different cultures that have been dumped here from different universes and different galaxies, such as mass amount of artists, mass amount of psychopaths, mass amounts of...
Think of the good side, too. Think of the good side. The inventors, the geniuses, the artists.
Yes. Would they not bring part of their own reality with them, time after time, life after life? And
yeah, in fact...
Could that contribute to multiple timelines?
Yeah, I'm sure it does. One of the things I think I think we'll eventually find out is that when extraterrestrial contact becomes more open, I think we'll eventually find out that our architecture, the buildings, the skyscrapers and everything, I just bet it looks an awful lot like some of the planets that many people came from. I bet that if you were actually to plop yourself in some of these other places and look around, you'd see buildings that look an awful lot like Rome, Paris, London, New York. Yeah. I just bet we're repeating ourselves. I bet there's a lot of memory that's coming right back in. For example, this is the last thing, and it's good, if we're going to wrap up, this is a good way to end it. I'm a mathematician, and mathematicians have always wondered what the hell happened to Newton. I mean, he's just an anomaly. I mean, you can come up with a new idea, but to come up with a whole new understanding of physics, force equals mass times acceleration and everything else, plus a complete understanding of the calculus, all with one person in a few years, nobody can do that. And I'm not saying somebody might be able. It's impossible. Nobody can come up with these ideas that quick. So he must have been remembering them. It must have been that he knew them before, and his creative process was tying into memory. No one can come up with, you need millions of years to figure out all this stuff, at least hundreds of thousands of years. I'm a mathematician. You can't get all that in one fell swoop. But he did. I mean, I'm talking about coming up with it from basic principles, you know, one equation at a time. His stuff is extensive beyond any possible imagination of how big it was. And as a mathematician, I just personally do not see how he could have literally invented it from whole cloth, from nothing. He had nothing to go on. He had nothing. Einstein at least had Newton's stuff to go on, but Newton had nothing. And in my mind, the only way he could have done it, and I don't doubt he did it, is not by inventing it from scratch out of nothing. He must have been deeply intuitive. He was a wacky guy. He was a little nutty. He must have been deeply intuitive and simply remembered. He thought he was creating it, but in reality, he was, wherever he came from, he knew that stuff before he got here. That's what my thoughts are.
Well, that's a good way to wrap it up for this session. So, Courtney, thank you for coming. We do appreciate it. And,
I really appreciate being here.
Oh, good. Glad you could make it. And people can get information and your videos and all kinds of things from your website, the farsight.org.
Yeah, farsight.org, FARSIGHT.org, O-R-G.
Okay. Well, thanks, everybody. Disaster Cat, Neil, MASH, and for me, Plain, and then, of course, Courtney Brown.
I want to thank everyone for participating and all the viewers for listening.
Thank you. Take care.